Okay, this video is How to Write Better, Part 5, Quotes and Concepts. And again, I got like over 100 lectures on writing. This is just a little bit of fun to kind of get you familiarized with this. If you're serious about learning how to write, you might want to hit the print screen button when you see a good quote, and you could save it, type it into your own text file, and you'll have them available to you later on. Make your own PowerPoint file on learning how to write, whatever works for you. But you also have to have an information capture system. You don't want to just expose yourself to something and then forget it all. For example, when I was a residency at Northwestern. I knew right from the first day I wanted to be a great doctor, so I didn't really give a rat's ass. I sat right in the front row, right with the attendings and the senior residents, and I would take notes on the conference lectures, and I would throw them into a box as soon as I walked home to be looked at, and then I later on go through the box. And all the other residents thought, oh, that's kind of too aggressive, or why show you're too eager, there's something uncouth about that. I could care less. I was by far the most knowledgeable resident. There was no one even in my ballpark. And there was like a girl who was second in her med school class. I knew her. She was a nice girl and she was a competent resident, but there was no remote comparison even. And I just tell you that because that type of intense desire to learn, it accelerates how fast you can learn. It's not a question of IQ. It's a question of intensity of purpose. And intensity of purpose dramatically accelerates learning and achievement. So if you want to get really good at something, be intense about it. Great people are intense about what they do. All right, so here's the quote. This one is by Roger Scruton. He says, "Art once made a cult of beauty. Now we have a cult of ugliness instead. This has made art into an elaborate joke, one which has now ceased to be funny." Okay, so basically the entire thing of modern art is all a big joke. It's the emperor's new clothes. It's all phony. And it's pathetic to see how many college professors, and so-called art inspectors sit there and talk about modern art as if it was something real. A child could do it. And what I'm saying is you see the same thing in a lot of pop culture. It's almost a gaslighting into vulgarity. It wants to make you forget the greatness of Western culture and art, which is magnificent. And that's actually something that would be worth your studying. Study great art. Study the good things. So anyways, I just let you know, trust your judgment, because usually you'll get a voice inside yourself that says, is this really good or not when you're exposed to something like modern art? It's a bunch of crap. Picasso was a phony, scumbag communist, all right? He stinks. I hate Picasso's art. All right. And he was just always taking advantage of his models. Anyways, we're not even going to go there. Okay, Roger Scruton continues. When art becomes merely shock value, our sense of humanity is slowly degraded. And that's also the feeling one gets when you see these vulgar modern movies that are all violent and based on action rather than, great movies are like the old time movies, like It's a Wonderful Life. The emotions involved, the real people, the real relationships, okay? And the old comedies were funny, stuff like Animal House and Stripes, all that stuff was great. You don't see movies like that anymore. Okay, Marshall McLuhan, he was the Canadian philosopher, literature, humanist guy, and he was sort of like the precursor to the modern Jordan Peterson. Here's some Marshall McLuhan quote. "The poet, the artist, the sleuth, whoever sharpens our perception tends to be antisocial. A strange bond often exists between antisocial types in their power to see environments as they really are. This is manifest in the famous story, The Emperor's New Clothes." So yeah, basically, the so-called antisocial guy is somebody who's able to step outside of conventional society. And quite often, that's going to be a person who reads a lot. It's going to be a high IQ person. They can see an objective point of view about a situation because they got more than one point of view. Somebody who reads a lot. Watching TV makes you stupid. Hanging around in pop culture makes you stupid. But being able to see things from the perspective of a person from another country or somebody educated in other points of view, like a religious point of view, for example, it enables you to be more objective. Okay, Marshall McLuhan continues. "The concern for an advertiser is to make an effect. He sets a trap for your attention. Any poet, painter, or musician sets a trap for your attention. That is the nature of the art." Yeah, well, if you're writing a book, you better make it good on the first page or they're not going to keep reading. Same thing on a video. There better be something good on the first page, otherwise they're not going to watch it. And it's like that for anything. A musician's got to make the beginning of the song good or the person switches to something else. Okay, Maxwell Maltz, he's the plastic surgeon, wrote about what leads to good medical outcomes versus bad, and he says, "You will act like the sort of person you believe yourself to be. If you think you are smart, then you will work to prove that you are smart." So what he's talking about is your self-image. So that's why people need encouragement as well. If they're hopeful and optimistic in their point of view about their self and their ability to achieve their objective, they're going to try harder. They're going to persist more. And he had noted that the patients who expected a good outcome and then wanted to get home fast to take care of their kids or do their job or their hobby, they would do well and get out of the hospital fast. Whereas the people who are unclear about their goals would mope around, complain they're in pain, and often have lousy outcomes. By the way, all these great athletes used to read Maxwell Maltz because he gets you psyched up. It's kind of like Brian Tracy, gets you to believe in yourself so you can achieve more and do more. Okay, John Gielgud, he's the actor who played the Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov Dostoevsky. You can watch that video on YouTube of him as the Grand Inquisitor. It's magnificent. The best book chapter ever written in any book ever in the history of the world. Okay, and here's what he says. One's self-image is very important because if that's in good shape, then you can do almost anything. Yeah, so basically you have to believe in your ability to achieve something before you're willing to make the effort to go for it. Like Henry Ford used to say, whether you believe you can do it or not, you're right. Okay, J. Michael Straczynski, Polish guy, writer, writing about writing, he says, writing is the process of asking the next logical question. Yeah, you're off on a good start when you could feel yourself saying, okay, this question, then this question, this question, in stepwise fashion. That's good writing. Okay, Straczynski continues, a good story should provoke discussion, debate, and argument. Writers write for one reason, to create an emotion in the reader. You want a reaction. That's good writing, when the reader's feeling it emotionally. And there should be something controversial and new. If there isn't, then why read it? Okay, Roger Schenck, he's a computer programmer guy, real bright guy, writes a lot of books about education and learning, and he says, humans are ideally set up to understand stories. They are not ideally set up to understand logic. Okay, that is true. Terry Goodkind, we can only do the best we can based on what we know. That is why the truth is so important. Yeah, you need correct information in order to make accurate decisions. And most of what you get in pop culture is not true. For example, if you're going to study nutrition, I can tell you 99% of what's in a newspaper or on legacy media TV, it's always wrong. It's almost always going to be some version of the keto diet or the Mediterranean diet, and that's a terrible diet. Okay, so that's why so many people are misinformed, because they actually pay attention to pop culture and legacy communication, which is all a joke. Okay, here's a quote by Orson Scott Card, science fiction writer. He said, in a way, being a Mormon prepares you to deal with science fiction because we live simultaneously in two very different cultures. The result is that we all know what it's like to be strangers in a strange land. So I think that's a good perspective about him seeing the world through the eyes of a Mormon enables him then to compare that with what he gets from his perspective as an American, and he can be more objective in his perceptions. And just one example similar to that in my own life, my wife had a friend who was from Poland, and their kid is about 10 years old, used to help his father making furniture. Okay, so the kid comes into my house in my kitchen, and he contemptuously smacks his hand against my kitchen table and says, this is crap, American quality. And I thought it was funny that some little kid's judging the furniture in my house and saying it's all American quality crap. And that's because he has a perspective of building furniture based on perspective from another country. Okay, and somebody who, I've seen a lot of Europeans, because they've got the perspective of what it's like in one country, you know, what's it like in France versus England versus Germany versus Poland versus Belgium, etc. They can see a lot of perspectives, and that makes them wiser than somebody who can only see it as the, you know, simple-minded American way. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. The history of intellectual growth and discovery demonstrates clearly that the need for unfettered freedom, the right to think the unthinkable, to discuss the unmentionable, to challenge the unchallengeable, to curtail free expression strikes twice at intellectual freedom. For whoever deprives another of the right to say unpopular views necessarily also deprives others of the right to listen to those views. Yeah, you got to have free speech in order to work to the truth. And people should be able to think things that are unthinkable, to discuss the unmentionable. Because a lot of times the accepted societal position is a lie. It's just based on some psyop BS to trick all the chumps into becoming poor slaves, and it's not true. So a lot of times I found a helpful way to get to the truth is just to say, what if the opposite is true? What if the opposite is true? And very often the opposite is true. So that just makes you a better thinker. There's a lot of tricks in thinking. The other one is a great quote by Carlyle. There's always a good reason, and then there's the real reason. So look at what the good reason is. That's the one that sounds nice, but it's actually not true. Then there'll be some real reason, which quite often is getting more money or power to the person pushing that line of thought. I also like the great Ayn Rand quote. If you think there's a contradiction, then recheck your premises. There are no contradictions, and quite often that's the case. I couldn't understand all kinds of situations, and then once I readjusted my premises, it all made sense. Okay, Jacques Berzon, he's the French humanist philosopher guy. He wrote a really good book called From Dawn to Decadence. It's another one of these monster books that you listen to for many weeks in your car. That's how I get through these monster books. I listen to the audio CDs, and I buy the textbook, and I just look up the good parts. Okay, so here's what he says. The history of creation is but a succession of battles between genius amateurs, inspired heretics, and orthodox professionals. Yeah, so quite often the so-called orthodox professional, they're getting paid by the university or some other power player or corporation, and they're going to push the dogmatic orthodoxy, conventional position, because that's what they're making. Their bosses are making money from. Okay, but quite often it's wrong, and the genius amateur comes along and can point out why it's wrong. But the danger in that is, the genius amateur, they're contradicting orthodoxy, and they can potentially lose their job, etc. But if people don't do that, you don't ever make any progress, any real progress, not fake BS progress, but true progress. Okay, and that's pretty much typical for, learning how to treat coronary artery disease, for example, with diet compared to stents and surgery. But there's no profit in the diet. That's why it's not popular. Okay, Oliver Goldsmith, he says, a book may be very amusing with numerous errors, or it may be very dull without a single absurdity. And I would give the example of Andrew Tate. In some ways, the guy's a total idiot. He eats meat all the time and he smokes cigars like an idiot. Okay, but on the other hand, he says a lot of clever, wise things, and he's funny. So even though he says a significant amount of stupid stuff and has stupid behavior in a lot of ways, he's worth listening to for his entertaining, clever observations on other things. Okay, versus there's a lot of college professors, and I've read tons of textbooks and other things by these guys, and they're a waste of time. They'll tell you nothing interesting. The sort of like what legacy media is to information, that's what they are to scientific information. Just old, trite stuff, much of it not true, and they're just doing it out of an obligation, not because they have anything to say or they even want to say anything. Okay, Francois René de Chateaubriand, he says, the original writer is not one who imitates nobody, but one who nobody can imitate. Yeah, all writers are going to have been inspired by the persons who have gone before them. A good writer usually has read the persons who have gone before them. But what makes them good is that they have their new component of things. Okay, T.S. Eliot here, he says, I love reading in others' readers' lists of favorites. Even when I do not share their tastes, I am provoked to compare, to contrast, and to contradict. It is a most healthy exercise and altogether fruitful. T.S. Eliot continues, an election is coming, universal peace is declared, and the foxes have a sincere interest in prolonging the lives of the poultry. Yeah, I always think that's funny how average people think that the system cares about them. The system doesn't care about them. It views them as just, potential slaves, chumps. Okay. All right. Here's T.S. Eliot continuing. No poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation is the appreciation of his relation to the dead poets and artists. Yeah, a real good writer quite often will have read extensively and knows the history of their genre, the history of their topic in some detail. And that actually makes writing more interesting when you can see how it's built on the past and what's new about it. Okay, that's also why you want to read a lot of these. If you're serious about writing, it depends what type of writing you're going to do, but if you're real serious about writing in general, you want to have read things like the Greek myths, the Bible, Renaissance stuff, so you can compare and contrast with it, because that's a lot of times what makes something good is the comparison to old stuff. All right, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, what comes from the heart goes to the heart. And by the way, I was goofing around here in this sentence by putting in bold print the first couple letters of these words, and we talked about, I think that was called bionic reading. And actually, I think it makes it a lot easier. It's been said that you can dramatically speed read faster when this has been done because the brain just guesses the word after it sees the first couple letters, and you can speed along very quickly. The downside of this bionic reading component is it takes a lot of time to do this. So if you had some way to format it, you could bold the first letter or two of every word. That would be way faster than doing it by hand all the way through. But I do think it dramatically speeds things up. Okay, Diderot now. He says, it is often necessary to give wisdom an air of foolishness to procure its entry. So he's Diderot. He's one of the philosophes in France before the French Revolution. And he was an atheist, kind of a jerk, but he's making a good point here is that you a lot of times have to joke around and sort of take an offhanded approach or an indirect approach if you're going to say something contradicting standard dogma. Otherwise, you'll get this giant aggressive backlash. So he's right about that. And Voltaire was good at that. Voltaire was much better at saying things in a funny way so he could make his point even though it went against current dogma. Okay, but I think ultimately the philosophes were destructive. You know, they led to the French Revolution. And the French Revolution, you know, like around 1793, it was dramatically different and far worse than the American Revolution. The American Revolution was Christian and about establishing freedom for the Americans. Okay, the French one was this brutal, violent affair. It was bad. Okay, Anthony S. Solon, he's a good college professor guy, and he says, we are suffering from cultural dementia, and it is time, little by little, for recovery. Yeah, Americans and people in Western countries, they have forgotten Western culture. They're a bunch of ignoramuses. They don't know about the ancient Greeks. They don't know about what happened in Rome. They don't know about the Renaissance. They don't know about the so-called Enlightenment. They don't know about the Victorian Renaissance. And all that stuff is worth knowing about. And I like Ayn Rand's book, you know, The Romantic Manifesto. It's magnificent about how great culture was in the 1800s. They were magnificent, the amount of great art that came out of the time. Most of the paintings you'll see that I use for thumbnails on all my videos, they came from the 1800s. And the greatest books ever written, the greatest novels ever written, they came from the 1800s. Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, for example. Okay, Anthony Solon continues. The postmodern man doesn't even know that he has a past to forget. Yeah, the typical person is ahistorical, functional illiterate who never reads and knows any history. And the problem about knowing that is like the Cicero quote, to not know the history, what happened before you were born, is to forever remain a child. Is that you can't have a sophisticated perspective if you don't know some history. You don't have anything to compare to. Like we talked about a moment ago, having multiple perspectives enables you to compare the current situation to other situations and then come up with a better, more objective, more accurate opinion about it. Okay, Daniel Everett, he wrote a book called How Languages Begin. Ambiguity is expected in a communication system. It is produced by the need to keep the amount that must be memorized low while maintaining efficient communication. Okay, Sidney Smith, he was a good English guy, writer guy. Life is to be fortified by many friendships. To love and be loved is the greatest happiness of existence. Yeah, it's great to love and be loved, but, you know, it's hard to find that. It's hard to keep that, okay? I notice a lot of stuff is popular, like these musical videos and stuff, because they remind people of when they were young. Splendor in the Grass. I mean, the easiest time to be in love is high school because you don't have to pay any bills. You don't have a job. Your parents support you. Your parents feed you. So you can just spend time and you get to meet all these different people. You can just find somebody you're really culturally well matched to, and you got all this in common from going to the same high school and living in the same town. You know, you get older, it's not that simple. Anyway, Sidney Smith continues, regret for the things we did can be tempered by time. It is regret for the things that we did not do that is inconsolable. Yeah, that's true. Gosh, a lot of things, the biggest things you regret when you're older is, why didn't I try harder to achieve some goal? Like for me, you know, I should have been an All-American in college. If I'd have won 4 years, I would have been an All-American. I came like this close, a match away from being an All-American, and it pisses me off. Anytime I think about that, I get upset. All right, anyways, Sidney Smith continues. Whatever you are by nature, keep to it. Be what nature intended you for, and you will succeed. And that kind of goes with the Goethe quote. If for a man to learn a complex thing, he must love it. Because if you love it, you're going to put more time into it. You're going to get better at it, you know. Like Elon Musk had said, you know, if one guy's working, you know, 10-hour days, 12-hour days, even if he's doing the same thing as the guy working in a 6-hour, 8-hour day, he's going to progress faster. Okay, Lisa Kirk quote. A gossip talks about others. A bore talks about themselves. A great conversationalist talks to you about yourself. Yeah, people like it when you have common ground and you pay attention to them. Some people with really good social skills, they know how to do that real well, and they're really well liked. Look at a dog. A dog is really well liked, even though it doesn't do much. John Asbury quote here. Poetry is mostly hunches. I feel that poetry is going on all the time inside an underground stream. Yeah, people are good at stuff. They think about what they do a lot. Eugene Ionesco talking about the life of a writer. For a writer, life consists of either writing or thinking about writing. Yeah, a writer wants good capture, meaning anything interesting that happens in the day, they're going to think about it or make a note about it and potentially use that later in their writing in some form. Franz Kafka. A writer should follow his obsessions relentlessly. Yeah, what happens is you get a feeling about something and you push it and you push it and you push it. And then you have a great insight, and all of a sudden you get scared because you're scared that you know you're going to break against convention with that insight, and you're like, will I be allowed to make this break against in convention? Will there be consequences for me? And that can be kind of scary, but you have to push as hard as you can, but know when to stop if you want to write anything that's good. Anais Nin, here's what she writes. The role of a writer is not to say what we all can say, but to say what we are unable to say. Yeah, you want to move the topic forward. And if you're not doing that, then why write? Okay, Anais Nin has another quote. One writes because one has to create a world in which one can live. That's also true. Writing can be therapeutic. When you're sad or frustrated about a situation, writing about it in great length, and there's other people who've known this, can give you a sense of release and you feel a lot better about it. Also, like Aristotle says, a fiction book shows people how the world ought to be, gives them something to aspire to. And Ayn Rand had talked about how that is so important, that a person has this sense of what is the possible. So those are other good things about writing. Writing is a really, way to empower your brain to become smarter, to learn something better, to see something, to see into something more deeply, more profoundly. Okay, John Greenleaf Whittier. They used to name all the schools after all these poets. Like there used to be schools when I was growing up. One was called Emerson, another was called Whittier. One was called Holmes too. Okay, anyways, John Greenleaf Whittier, he says, the joy that you give to others is the joy that comes back to you. Yeah, what goes around comes around. People who are nice have other people be nice to them. Charles Sheffield, if you want to be on the leading edge of anything, you have to, by definition, be a couple of standard deviations away from most people. That will make you an oddball. The trick is to learn to accept it and then to like it and to keep on making a lot of noise for what you believe in. Yeah, so I think what actually ends up happening is it depends what field you're in. If you're an athlete, people love it when you're great and you move things ahead, okay? Oops, shoot, I screwed that up. They like it when you do that as an athlete. They like it if you do it in a field where to advance is potentially profitable. Like if you're in tech or computer programming, to improve computer programming, that's profitable. But it becomes a problem if you're in a field that's stagnated, like clinical medicine, where you recognize a better way to doing something, and the better way will probably be less profitable, then that will get squashed. So it's actually funny, but I actually think for somebody who's really high IQ, you probably don't want to go into medicine or go into something that's amoral. When I say amoral, I don't mean immoral, I mean amoral, without morals. Like that's one of the reasons why I ended up liking neuroradiology is my job is just to read the brain MRI, not to make it a therapeutic decision about what medicine to prescribe. So that's good. Also, there's certain surgical fields where the indications are obvious, and that's another way to get around it if you decide to go into medicine and you have a really high IQ. But it would be nice if there was a place where you could just do research and it was fun to let the scientists just pick their own direction, because if the scientist picks their own direction, they're gonna sense better than anyone else can what is worthwhile to spend time on. When science is done just for a corporate profits, it almost always ends up becoming dishonest. And again, that's why, they've been studying cancer intensely since 1970, okay? And they've come up with next to zero findings after hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent. It's a big joke. Okay, Arthur Miller. The best work that anybody ever writes is on the verge of embarrassing him always. Arthur Miller. Yeah, you have to go out on a limb. That's where the fruit is, so to speak. That's what it takes to do great work. But then that becomes dangerous because you're contradicting orthodoxy. So it's always a challenge to feel that out and decide how far can you go at the current time. But you have to get used to being in that situation in order to do good work. Okay, Andre Marot, he says, first of all, a word about a positive. I'm going to talk a lot more about a positives later, but you should know what they are. That's when you have a noun and then you have a description of the noun that's a quick descriptor phrase and the sentence continues. So like you might say, okay, here's a sentence within a positive. Mr. Jones, the old guy who drives a Cadillac. Okay, so that's in a positive. The old guy who drives a Cadillac. That's an identifier. And the benefit is, that's how we really talk to our friends. You know her, the girl with the red glasses. That clues in your friend to who that person is better than perhaps anything else could. And the good writers will do those a lot. We're going to talk about Francis Christensen. Francis Christensen was this English professor at University of Southern California in the 1960s. And he was teaching English literature, and he suddenly had an epiphany that, gosh, English literature professors don't even know what they're talking about. And the reason he said that is they would teach children, college students, how to read and write in a certain way. And he realized that almost none of his other English professors were good writers. And he decided to study good writing based on, he got all these famous books and bestseller books, and he studied how do they actually write. And he made a list of what all their sentence structures were. And he found out that they constantly were using appositives, but none of the English professors knew about this or even taught it. And then when people start using the positives, their writing becomes a lot better. It's making the writing more conversational, like a smart person would talk, and just throwing in these little descriptor phrases, and they personalize everything. So anyways, we'll come back to a positive. That's a sign of good writing. Dostoevsky would do that all the time. Okay, Andre Murat, he said, writing is a difficult trade which must be learned slowly by reading great authors, by trying at the outset to imitate them, and then by daring to be original. Yeah, just like a painter learns. A painter imitates the paintings of the great masters. They start to figure out how it's done, and then they gradually add their own touch, become original. That's how you do it. You got to go through that before you can do advanced creative work. We talk about a learning curve. A learning curve starts out with this exciting, rapid phase of learning, and you're all thinking about the potential of what you could do. Then you hit the long, tedious grind, and you got to master a lot of basic skills before you can start to rapidly ascend and really get good. Okay, let me see here if I can move this thing. Coming over there. Okay. All right. Beginning is the most important part, like Plato said. Don't waste time, get right to the point fast. Good writing is high contrast. There's a lot of ways you can generate high contrast. Besides the topic, you can accentuate it with punctuation. We'll talk about that, and I'll have a different lecture on format, playing around with fonts, and we'll get into all that. A positive, this is the guy Francis Christensen who did all that work of the positives, and that was great work. Your writing will improve as soon as you become aware of the positives. And I like his story. He really figured out what's the truth about good writing. Okay? Learn rhetoric. Rhetoric especially came from the Greeks. They would summarize all the great techniques of the great speakers, and they wrote them all down. Aristotle wrote a book about it, and that's very valuable. A lot of times you'll want to change the names because some of the Greek names are too hard to pronounce, but the basic idea of these are templates into which to put words to make them more memorable, that's very useful. Chiasmus is great. Oscar Wilde would do that all the time. Antithesis is great. Voltaire would do that all the time. Rhetorical questions are great. They just highlight the issue in a big, major emotional way. Learning to build to a crescendo effect is good. Like the music of Handel is great at that. Listen to the song by Handel called Sarabande, Sarabande, Sarabande. And man, you will feel the emphasis, or the Alleluia chorus from the Messiah. It's great. Look at the great comedians like Sam Kinison, Eddie Murphy, the way they build to crescendo, this intense emotion where you almost can't take it anymore, tension and release. The great ones, that's what they do. They build up a crescendo effect. And you notice that some of these words almost sound like musical words, like describing music. And that's the tone of their voice. It's all part of their persona and what makes them such great comedians. Okay, write for the intelligent friend. That's the kind of person who would actually want to read what you have to write. The story is more important than just about anything else. Stephen King would emphasize that big time, how that was the most important thing. He wrote a whole book about writing. It was actually a pretty good book. I don't like Stephen King. I think he's a jerk, and I don't think he's that great a writer. But his book on writing was pretty good. And obviously he knows how to make money with writing. Victor Hugo, the sublime and the grotesque. So he would put the contrast of the sublime and the grotesque. So the sublime would be in, like, say, the Hunchback of Notre Dame. The Hunchback was kind of grotesque in some ways, but he's actually a very good person. The sublime was the magnificent cathedral of Notre Dame. And also the grotesque was, the sort of the monkish guy was kind of an evil guy in Notre Dame. One of them, I forgot his name, Frodo or something like that. I know that's Hobbit, but anyways. Redemption, a great theme. A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens. That's built into humans, the theme of redemption. That's my favorite book. I think that's the best novel of all time, Christmas Carol. A lot of great movies made based on that too. So these are just some styles, and these are some good books to read. Tolstoy, again, omniscient point of view, great accuracy of perception. When I read Anna Karenina, I felt like I was there watching. But Tolstoy, he's a jerk. The more you learn about him, the less you like him. I read some biographies on him, and I really didn't like him. The more I learned about him. Extended metaphor of Animal Farm, yeah, it's magnificent for that, like an allegory, okay? Cliffhanger chapters. Da Vinci Code was the best book I ever read in terms of their ability to make you excited to turn the page and go to the next chapter. For cliffhanger endings that almost stop in the middle of an action, exciting moment, so you want to keep going. You don't want to stop. You'll put the book down quite often at a chapter ending, but man, you want to pick it up again to get that. Okay, the force of exertion, like Handel, we talked about that. Building to crescendo. Oscar Wilde would give you all these fun laughs. A lot of times, like The Importance of Being Earnest. The book was kind of silly, but he had so much cleverness in it, you really wanted to get back to the book. He would reward you. You stick it out through a page of fancy descriptions, and all of a sudden there'd be these funny, clever chiasmus quotes and jokes and wordplay and pun. So I really liked Oscar Wilde, even, and he's full of quotes. He had a lot of great quotes. Okay, Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer would often provide a lot of very valuable information in per unit amount of time spent reading him. Arthur Schopenhauer really helped me to improve my writing because he talked about how you must do it for the thing alone, for love of the subject. And the great books are always written that way. So he's very good on that. I have a book somewhere in here about creating great quality books that will last, of lasting value. And I think you should go for that, because if you go for that, you'll at least produce something good. Whether or not it ever gets known, it'll at least be good. Later on, we'll talk about all the games you can play with punctuation, formatting, and think of them as tools to enhance your writing. We talked about embodied simulation. We talked about appositives. Voltaire was the king of antithesis, Wilde the king of chiasmus, Tom Wolfe the king of onomatopoeia. Okay, how do you crank out a paper fast when you really need to? Let me just pull myself down here. Okay, I would say that choose a topic you're interested in because you're going to want to study it. It'll be fun to do the project. Watch videos on it, read books about it, read the papers on it, take notes from all these things. Hit print screen to save pictures to get an idea of how you can use those, incorporate them. Then have a conversation with somebody. Then as soon as you're done with the conversation, run and go write the paper down. The words should flow quickly. Forget about the grammar on the rough draft. You can edit it later. Make a mind map where you put the central subject in the center and then the points coming out of it. The nice thing about a mind map is you can freely do it because you're not worried about order. When you make an outline, that's harder to do because everything has to be in order. With a mind map, order doesn't matter. So you can quickly get your ideas down so you don't forget them. Let's see, Schopenhauer's advice, one idea per sentence, be concise. But anyways, that's how you get a paper done. Edit it the next day. That's the best day to edit. Trust yourself. If something feels good, it probably is good. Get one person who you respect to read it, and that's how you crank out a paper fast. So anyways, I think that's the end of this little session on writing. And in the future, I'm going to stick more to one subject at a time rather than go through all these quotes. So I hope that was useful.